I'm reporting on South Sudan, which is located here in red, south of Sudan, also next to the DRC, Uganda, and Ethiopia, to name a few. Here in the closer map, the capital Juba is located along the Nile River. I'm assigning South Sudan a grade of F because it is a failed state with widespread human rights abuses, government corruption and dysfunction, and lack of individual rights. Some facts and figures were hard to find, I'm guessing because the country is so young and quite dysfunctional. So, for example, life expectancy at birth, one source said was around 57 years old, but another source said is unknown. Also, the unemployment rate for youth ages 15 to 24 is 18.5%, but I'm guessing it's a lot higher for the rest of the population. Also to note is that the main export is oil, thus there's a heavy reliance on oil. And in 2012, when there was a disagreement with Sudan, oil production shut down, sending the country into economic deterioration. South Sudan used to be the southernmost province of Sudan. It was once called Equatoria and went through a legacy of intervention, first by Egypt, thus Britain, then Islamic Mahdist revolutionaries, then Britain again, and Christian missionaries. So there's quite a mix there. It has always been kind of separate from Sudan because it is Christian, whereas Sudan is more Muslim. And when Sudan gained independence in 1956, South Sudan was supposed to be part of the political process because it was part of the state of Sudan, but it was left out. And so there was conflict between southern Sudan and Sudan for 2 different 20-year periods. Finally, in 2005, there was a peace agreement that led to a referendum, and finally in 2011, South Sudan became an independent state. But 2 years after that, in 2013, a civil war started in South Sudan, and there has been dysfunction ever since. Even after a peace agreement in 2015, the country is still in war. So the current conflict started as a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar. Kiir is part of the Dinka tribe, while Machar belongs to the Nuer tribe, and so their conflict was based a lot on ethnicity, and so brought conflict to the country as a whole, and those two tribes in particular. The SPLA is the government force working for Salva Kiir, and the SPLA in opposition is the force working for Machar. Both forces have been found responsible for human rights abuses, including killings of civilians, which are often due to their assumed political alliance to the opponent because of their ethnicity. There's terrible details of the crimes perpetrated against these civilians, which include shooting, decapitation, torture, burning, hanging, gouging of eyes, and slitting of throats. So there have also been a lot of civilian deaths due to displacement because the two groups have been looting and burning villages. So people have been forced to flee and then forced into starvation and thirst. A second issue is sexual and gender-based violence, which is a huge part of this war, and rape is really widespread, mostly of women, but also of men. A lot of the time, rape is taken the place of formal payment. So on both sides, but maybe especially by SPLA soldiers against Nuer women, there have been many rapes, and there's some gruesome details about that here. A third issue is the impact of the war on children. Children have not been spared in these rapes and abductions and killings, but also they have been recruited as child soldiers. So a lot of the time, troops from both sides recruit child soldiers because they're vulnerable and they threaten to kill their family, or they do kill their family and threaten to kill those children themselves. So a lot of teenagers become child soldiers who then have to commit the same crimes of killing and rape, etc. Also, third point is that schools and hospitals have been looted and burned, and so those safe havens essential to children's development no longer are as strong. Here are images of child soldiers, an image of women who are speaking out and protesting against using children as soldiers. These are just more photos of people who are trying to seek refuge, more soldiers, people fleeing, and lack of resources to food, water, etc. A current news story ties in the earlier discussion about oil as an economic asset. Well, it turns out that oil has been corruptly funding the civil war, including funding the SPLA, which has been responsible for these human rights abuses, and funding politicians and government officials and military personnel. So that's showing a lot of the corruption there. One of the NGOs to highlight is Hope for Community Empowerment, where South Sudanese youths are actively involved in creating different projects for South Sudan for peace and economic development. So as an overview, the human rights grade of F stands because of all the human rights abuses and the lack of government support for people and the lack of individual freedom and ability to have basic human rights.